Welcome to our Wednesday Bible study. My name is Greg Napper, one of the pastors at Bethlehem Baptist Church, and today we are continuing in our study of the book of Job, and we are in lesson 6. Today we are going to be hearing strictly from Job. We got through all the first 3 rounds of Job's friends talking, Job responding back to them, and today we're going to be hearing from Job specifically. He ended in chapter 26 addressing Bildad. He kind of cut Bildad off there as he began to chastise Job. Job cut him off, and at that point he began to speak, and he didn't stop speaking at that point. And so for the next several chapters, we get to hear from Job. And he's going to be talking about things like integrity, things about wisdom, and then ultimately he's going to offer up his defense. Now, the biggest majority of this, some of it's still written poetically, some of it's just written outright, and we're going to get to see him now address God. He's going to address God directly, especially when we get into the latter chapters of what we're going to be looking at today. He's going to offer up his defense to God. So we're going to get to see a lot of different things from Job today. And as we do each week, let's just take a moment to lift up our voices to the Lord, to offer just thanks and praise to Him, but then also ask Him to just to focus our time and our minds in on Him, so that we can receive from this study what He wants us to receive. So let's do that together. Father, we thank You for this day, for this time, God. This the ability to look to Your Word here in the middle of the week. God, I pray that we would use it to, God, to fill us, God, to rejuvenate us in the middle of the week. Maybe some of us need just that little pick-me-up. And so, God, we pray that You would do that You would use these words to encourage us in our daily walk with You, that, God, we would devote ourselves to You, and that You would focus in this time so that we can just concentrate on You, on Your Word, what You want us to learn from this. So Lord, with that, we put this entire study in Your hands, asking for Your Holy Spirit to come upon us, to move us, to help us understand, to give us wisdom. And Lord, we also ask that You would forgive us in any way that we fail You. Lord, help us to turn from the things in our lives that we ought not do, and commit ourselves to You wholly and fully. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So today we are beginning in chapter 27, and we're going to be looking specifically at chapters 27 through 31. Again, these are all fairly large chunks, but it's somewhat difficult to break them out without doing a 6-month study, as you could totally do with the book of Job. But so what we're going to do, we're going to look at first here, we're going to look at chapter 27. And in chapter 27, Job is talking more about integrity in this particular chapter. And so, again, remember, he cuts Bildad off. Bildad had been speaking there in chapter 25, and he cuts him off. He began to speak in chapter 26. And then we get to where he is now. And remember, Zophar never even got to respond. The others all had 3 times where they responded to Job. Zophar never actually responded a 3rd time. And what Job begins with here, and still addressing his friends, but also speaking to the Lord, in verses 1 through 6 specifically, chapter 27, verses 1 through 6, he starts off mostly right. Remember, Job isn't a story of someone who is absolutely perfect. I mean, we do have, there in the first chapters where God and Satan, and they're in the meeting, and God says, have you considered my servant Job, who is upright and blameless, and God considers him and counts him as righteous. But it doesn't mean that Job is perfect. Remember, there's none of us are perfect, and we're told that all throughout Scripture that we aren't perfect. Instead, we're supposed to be trying to achieve this idea of following Christ and His perfection, not our own. And we can't obtain perfection until one day when the Lord calls us home and He makes us new again. And so it's okay that Job isn't perfect, but we get great examples from Job that we can see. Look, he's just a guy like we are. He's a guy that was doing his best. And so when we look at verses 1 through 6, here's what it says. It says, "And Job again took up his discourse, and he said, As God lives, who has taken away my right. He says, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me, and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me to say that you are right." And he's speaking to his friends there. "Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me." He says, "I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days." So verses 1 and 2 there, we got to see that Job is incorrect. He says, takes up his discourse and he says, "As God lives, who has taken away my right, the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter." Well, God isn't the one that did these things. Remember, in the very first chapter, we got to see that Satan is the one that said, "Let me do these things, and Job will turn against you, and he will curse you to your face." And God said, "You can do whatever you want." So God isn't the actual one who did these things to Job. He did allow these things to happen to Job, but he's not the doer in this situation. So Job is actually incorrect in his assumption here that God is the one doing these things to him. Because he says, "As God lives, who has taken away my right, the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter." God didn't do those things. Satan has done those things. And then you get in verses 3 and 4 where Job is he's absolutely correct. So he goes from he's off base, now he's back on track. And then he says, "My lips will not speak falsehood, my tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me to say that you are right." He says, "Till I die, I will not put my integrity away from me." In other words, he's like, "I'm not going to speak out against the Lord. I'm not going to speak any falsehoods. I'm not going to tell you lies. I'm not going to hold to these false truths and these things that his friends have been spewing at him." He's like, "No, I'm casting those things off. Those things are untrue. I'm not going to believe them simply because you say it." So Job is absolutely correct in that context. But then he goes way off base. And here's where he does that. In verse 6, he says, "I hold fast my righteousness. I will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days." And hear what he says there. I hold fast my righteousness. Is it really his righteousness that matters? Or is it the righteousness that God counts him? You see, when we begin to say, "Well, I believe that I'm righteous, and I'm going to hold fast to my righteousness." And then he says, "I'm not going to let it go. I'm going to stand on my righteousness." And then he says, "My heart does not reproach me for any of my days." In other words, he says, I can look back and I can see where I have done no wrong. If you're like I am, I can look back and I can see plenty of wrong that I have done. Plenty of it. I mean, I'd make you a list, but we'd have to have that 6-month Bible study that I was mentioning earlier. So here's the thing. Job doesn't just simply go off track here, but he goes way off base. And he's like, I'm going to stand on my own righteousness. I'm going to hold true to that. And he says, I can look back and I can see where I've not done a single thing wrong that should have caused me the things that I am enduring right now, the suffering that he has been going through. So Job is off base. Then we get into verses 7 and 8, where Job then makes this strong statement about his adversaries, those who are standing against him. He says this in verse 7. He says, "Let my enemy be as the wicked, and let him who rises up against me be as the unrighteous. For what is the hope of the godless when God cuts him off, when God takes away his life?" So, Job he's like, look, I've got these enemies who are wanting to come against me. Those are the people who are the wicked. And you know who's included in that? Those three friends. Those three friends who were supposed to have come to comfort Job. He's looking at them now as being adversaries, those who are standing against him. Because not only did they come to comfort him, but they ultimately decided, comfort's not really what you need. Instead, you need condemnation, and you need judgment, and you need accusations cast against you in your time of need, in your time of grief, in your time of sorrow. So instead of us coming and being good neighbors, instead of coming and being good friends, we are going to come and we are going to be your accusers, whether we are right or whether we are wrong. And then we are going to stand on those things and proclaim them to be from God. And Job is looking at them and saying, no, that's not how this works. Job, he then serves up Eliphaz some of his own medicine, some of his own words. In verses 11 and 12, he says, "I will teach you concerning the hand of God. What is with the Almighty, I will not conceal. Behold, all of you have seen it yourselves. Why then have you become altogether vain?" See, Eliphaz had claimed to sort of be able to speak for God in chapter 22. He believed that he knew God so well. Eliphaz was like, I am so connected to God that I can come to you and I can say these things to you, and I can tell you that this is why you are suffering. I can tell you that it is because of your sin that you are going through the things that you're going through. And Job is saying, no, I'm not having any of that, because I know that I'm blameless. I know that I am upright. I know that I haven't done anything against God, that these things should have come against me. Instead, I believe in God. I follow God. And so he's looking at Eliphaz and he says, these are the things that you had said, but you said them falsely. He said that he's like, behold, all of you have seen it for yourselves. Like, you've watched me. I've been a witness to you all these years. You've known me. And yet you're bringing these things against me that you've never even seen me do before. It's like, you've come together in vain. Like, why are you doing this? Is it more for you, or is it more for me? So then in verses 13 to 23, Job then describes the wicked. Now, the wicked have been described to Job a couple of times now, a couple of different ways, and a couple of different friends. And so he's heard what they've had to say concerning the wicked. But this should now go back and serve as a warning to Job's friends, the ones who have already come to him and said, hey, we're going to explain to you how this person who is a wicked person, I'm going to explain to you what that looks like and how you fit in. Instead, now Job is saying, let me explain to you what the wicked look like. And it should serve as a warning to Job's friends if he is indeed righteous, and then they're considered judgmental. Verse 13, it says that this is the portion of a wicked man with God, and the heritage that oppressors receive from the Almighty. Now, I can tell you that Job is going to be right in making this type of a statement, but he's got to be careful. He's got to be careful that he doesn't do it the same way that they did, making false accusations, being judgmental wrongly. And so anytime that we're going to cast judgment upon a situation or against someone, we have to be careful. We got to make sure that what we are doing is being done biblically. And if it's not, if we don't have a witness, if we don't have testimony, if we don't have evidence, we should probably remain silent. And so if you're doing those types of things, you probably fit more into the category of the wicked than that person does. if you're making false accusations, if you're making things, appear that aren't there just to help prove your point, then you are more wicked than the person you're accusing. We jump then to chapter 28. Chapter 28, Job is speaking more on the topic of wisdom here. And so verses 1 through 11, these verses here are speaking much about like gold, silver, precious metals, and just about how hard they are to find. And then even when you do find them, just how difficult it is to refine them, to make them pure, and make it so that you don't just have this like, old dirty clump of gold. Instead, you're going to make it into something beautiful and precious and pure. And so Job is talking about these things, about the gold, about the silver, about these precious metals, and he describes that man is seeking after these things, that it's only men who seek after these types of things. He's like, look at man. Man goes out and he wants to find these precious metals. He wants to go out and find these things because they hold them in value. They become important. He says, but look at the animals. Like, look at the birds. Look at the animals around us. He's like, they don't seek after these same sorts of things. They have no desire to go out and to find silver or gold or something that they're like, that isn't in their need for life. When you take into account who we are as people, do we need gold? Do we need silver? No. It's really nice to have because it's worth, but we don't need it. I could go my entire life without ever having one simple piece of gold. I could live my life just fine. It would have zero impact on my life. See, that's what the animals do. That's what the birds do. They go through their entire lives and they just get what they need. See, the Lord provides for them. Remember, there's this verse that talks about it in the Bible. It says, the birds of the air, like I'm supplying for their needs. I'm giving them everything that they, I'm giving them food. I'm giving them shelter. I'm giving them everything that they could possibly need for life. He's like, how much more will I supply for you? The one whom I love, the one whom I created, the one that I created in my own image. How much more will I do for you than for these birds of the air? So Job is describing these things, and he's saying, look at what man does. Man seeks after the wrong things. And so in verses 12 through 22, these verses is where Job begins to speak about this wisdom, about how true wisdom is a mystery to man. It's unknown. Like, we don't understand true wisdom. We don't know true wisdom. In 15 through 19, in chapter 28, verses 15 through 19, Job describes that all the precious metals and all their worth could not even buy true wisdom. It can't buy it. Like, I could round up every ounce of gold, every ounce of silver, every single bit of it, take all the gold out of Fort Knox, and I could go and I could say, look, it's like, I want to buy all the wisdom, true wisdom. I want all of it. And they're like, yeah, no, we can't do that. You can never purchase true wisdom. Verses 20 to 22 explain why. True wisdom is hidden from man. True wisdom is hidden from man and all living creatures. See, we're not able to obtain true wisdom. We can become wise, but we can't obtain true wisdom. See, even going all the way back to Adam and Eve, there they are, they're in the garden, and God says you can have anything that's in this garden, anything at all. He says, except I don't want you to go and eat from this one tree. From this one tree. The one that has the knowledge of good and evil. That's the first thing they did. Well, Eve goes, plucks some fruit off of that tree, takes a bite, and she offers it over to Adam. And in his unwise mind, he then takes a bite. And then sin enters into the world, and we begin to have the decay that begins to happen all around us, everywhere, every day. Death and destruction becomes more and more and more. You see, they had wisdom, but they didn't have all the wisdom, because one of the things that happened there in the garden when Adam and Eve were there was that Satan came and he tempted them, and he said, surely you won't die if you eat of the fruit of this particular tree. He says, and God doesn't want you to do that. God doesn't want you to have the fruit of this particular tree, because he knows that if you eat of it, that you'll become like him, that you will become wise like him, that you will then know the things that he knows, and he doesn't want you to have that. He's trying to hide that from you. He's trying to keep that from you. I'm here to tell you that that's absolutely true. God doesn't want us to know everything, because it's not good for us to know. If God was to fill my mind right now with everything so that I had all knowledge, would I really use it to glorify him? Would I really use it for good? Would I really use it to better everyone around me? Would I really use it to better this entire planet? Would I use it completely and solely for everyone else's and everything else's good instead of my own, so that I put myself last? Would I have all this knowledge and receive zero gain for myself? The answer to that is likely not. At some point, I would take that knowledge, I would take all that wisdom, and I guarantee you I would do something for myself. I would totally do something for myself. But you see, God, who has all wisdom, who is all knowing, who is all powerful, what does he do? What is it that God does? He created everything for who? For us. Did he do it for himself? He created it for us. Why? Because he loves us. And then when we screwed it up, what did he do? Well, did he just simply write us off and say, well, look, I'll just wipe all of them out and I'll start over anew. I'll just create something else, and I'll make a world of pandas, and the pandas are going to run around and they're going to be my people now. No, God said, I created man in my image because I love them. And I'm going to care for them. And I'm not going to give up on them. I'm not going to leave them. I'm never going to forsake them. Instead, I'm going to take all the wisdom, all the power, all the knowledge that I have, and I'm going to make a way for them to come out of this sin that they have gotten themselves into. And what did he do? He took all of that knowledge, all of that power, all of that wisdom, and he put it into his son Jesus. And he gave up his one and only son. He gave up his one and only son, who would then come with full knowledge, with full power, with full wisdom, to give himself up freely as a ransom for us, because we couldn't get rid of the sin on our own. Instead, we needed someone like Jesus, who was perfect and blameless and upright, truly perfect and blameless and upright. We needed Jesus to come and to become that sacrifice for us. And so God, being all-knowing, being all-wise, all-powerful, gave up everything, himself, gave up his one and only son so that you and I could have life when we don't even deserve it. God is so giving. God is so merciful. He's so full of grace. He gave his son to die for you and I. If you had that type of power, if you had that type of wisdom, do you think you would give up your only child to die for someone else? Would you use that type of wisdom, that type of power, to give up your one and only son, to die for all of humanity? Many of them who despise you, many of them who hate you, want nothing to do with you. Would you send your one and only son to die for them? Or would you use your wisdom, all of your power to say, no, I'm not going to take care of those. If they don't like me, then fine, they can go away. If they don't like it, they can go figure it out on their own. Fine, if they don't want me, if they despise me, if they hate me, they can figure it out for themselves. Because you know what? That's what we do all the time. That's what we do all the time. We snub our nose up. We just shoo people away. We say, if that's how you're going to be, then fine, go away. If you don't like it here, get out. If you don't like the United States of America, there's another country over there. Go live over there. You don't like it, tough. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me how to make this happen. You're the one that screwed it up. You get yourself out of it. These are the things that we are so used to hearing and spewing out of our mouths, but is that what God did? Is that what God does? It's not. It's not at all what God has done. It's not what God has proven himself to be. It's not who God is. Instead, God is the one that says, I love you and I am going to make a way for you. And instead, I'm going to put myself last. And I'm going to put Jesus, my one and only Son, in your path. And all you have to do is believe in him. All you have to do is trust him. All you have to do is follow him. And I will give you everlasting life. Everlasting life. Does that sound like someone who is misusing the power of all wisdom? It doesn't to me. It sounds like the type of person that I would hope for to have all that wisdom. Instead of someone who's like me, who's imperfect, and who would ultimately use that type of power, that type of knowledge for their own personal gain. It's just the way it is. If we're true, if we're honest about it, if we're honest with ourselves, we know that we can never be perfect enough or wise enough to do what God has done. That's the reason that Job is looking at God this way. That's the reason that Job is talking about this kind of wisdom that he says in verses 20 to 22. True wisdom is hidden from man and living creatures because no one, nothing is able to contain that type of wisdom and use it perfectly. Verses 23 to 28. He sums it up like this. He says, God understands the way to do it, and he knows its place. Read that again. God understands the way to do it, and he knows its place. It's exactly what I've been saying. Job is pointing you to that. Trust God because he knows. He is all wise. He is all powerful. Trust God because he understands how to do this thing. Picture where Job is. Think about what has happened to Job. He has lost all of his children, all of his possessions. He's lost everything. He's got friends that are coming against him, speaking false accusations against him. And what does he say? He says, do I wish that I had all the wisdom in the world? He says, no, because I can't do it right. No one can do it right except for God. God understands the way to do it. God understands. He's still looking to God. He's still trusting in God to do what only God can do. God gives wisdom, and he decides exactly how much wisdom to hand out. How much he gives to each person is a choice that he chooses for himself. I will have the wisdom that I have because God has chosen to give it to me. You will have the wisdom that you have because God has chosen to give it to you, and he will do it to your capacity to which you are able. And it doesn't mean that somebody else is better than you. There's tons of people who are much more wise than I am. My dad, God bless and rest his soul, he was so wise. So wise. I still wish to this day that I was as wise as he was. And maybe one day, maybe I'll get there. But here's the thing. He knew he had to train this man up. to raise 4 boys, to prepare me for what I was going to face. It's my job now to take the wisdom that's been imparted to me and to share that with my daughter Sierra, and to bless her as she goes, so that God can provide her with the wisdom that she's going to have, so that one day, maybe as she has children, she can impart her wisdom. We're going to have the wisdom that God imparts to us. We're not going to have more than we're supposed to have for a reason. And we're never going to have all the wisdom, nor should we, because we're never ever going to handle it rightly. Only God can do it according to His will, according to His way. God is perfect. Now, let's look at chapter 29. Moving along here, chapter 29. This is sort of like an ode to the past. That's the way I've got it written down here. This is Job now. It's an ode to the past. And so he's like reminiscing. He's reminiscing of his past, the things that are long ago, or maybe not necessarily too long ago, but they feel like they're long ago. Because if you've gone through what Job has gone through, yesterday probably feels like years ago. You know, when you had your flocks, when you had your servants, when you had your 10 children, when your wife still believed in you, you know, like those probably seem like distant memories to Job right now after spending several days with these accusing friends, especially. I mean, how many of you have ever had like one really hard, long week and you're just like, oh my gosh, I don't know if this thing's ever going to end. And you look at the previous week where maybe not a whole lot was going on, or maybe you had just gotten off vacation and you're just like, oh man, this just feels like it was so long ago. See, Job is doing that. He's reminiscing. He's looking to the past, and he's like longing for these days that were there before his life was turned upside down. And so we get in, we jump down to like verse 11. So chapter 29, verses 11 through 13, Job is reflecting on just how blessed he felt when he was helping other people who were in need. You know, when we do that, I can tell you there's so many times that I have done something for someone else in an effort to bless them, and then I walked away feeling so blessed myself because of maybe the way that they received my help, or maybe it was the way that they thanked me or expressed something to me in the process of me helping them that I wasn't aware of, something that I got for them, or maybe as I was helping them, I got to see their faith, and their faith encouraged me, and it strengthened me to want to do even more help, to want to go and help someone else. Maybe it caused them, by receiving this help, to want to go help someone else. You see, oftentimes I have been blessed in the ministry of God's work, far greater than any blessing I have ever given. And it wasn't even something I was looking for. Sometimes you're just doing something for someone else. You're giving of yourself, you're giving of your time, you're giving of your talents, you're giving of your money. It's sort of like tithing at church. What God is asking of you and from you. And you're just doing that freely for someone else. And you know, and the thing is you walk away and you're just like, oh my gosh, why do I feel so good? Like I was here for them. I hope they feel good because I feel great. You know, it's such a blessing when you're able to help other people. And that's what Job was looking at here. He's reflecting on those things. In verses 14 through 20, Job is remembering how he used his wealth, how he used his possessions, everything that he had to care for people in need. Remember, Job was like one of the richest men in the East. And so for him, he was like, I've got all these things. I've got all this money. I've got all this stuff. I got all this livestock. I can use this to bless other people. He didn't just simply hoard it for himself. In chapter 29, so we're still in chapter 29, verses 21 to 25, Job thinks back to when others actually used to listen to him and wanted his counsel. They actually sought out his advice. But that's all changed now. That's all changed in the fact that that now he's got these three friends who have come to him, and where maybe they used to listen to him, they used to ask for his advice, because remember, again, he was the greatest in the East. He was considered rich just beyond imagination, and he had all these children and servants, and people looked up to Job. But now they're looking at him and they're going, wow, what happened to you? Like, look at you, you're a mess, you look disgusting. It talks about how people would look at him and they would spit at his sight. He was that terrible looking. And, you know, he's looking back at this and he's going, what, man, how great were those days? Like, what happened? You know, these people used to come to me. I used to be the guy, you know, handing out information, advice, just helping people. And now look at how things are going. See, Job was a light to other people. We are called to be a light to other people. We are called to help people who are in need. We're called to care for the widows and the orphans and just, you know, that's who we are. God calls for us to do his work. That's what Job was doing. He would see somebody and he would ask how he could help them. He used his money. He used his flock. He used everything. If he had a place for him to stay, he would offer him a place to stay. This is in stark contrast to Job's friends. This is in stark contrast to the adversaries who Job now has against him. Remember, they were supposed to be coming in comfort. They were supposed to be coming to offer help to Job, to lift him up and encourage him. And instead, they did the exact opposite and accused him of things that he hadn't even done. Were they supplying for their neighbor? Were they giving a neighbor who was in need a helping hand? Absolutely not. Instead, they were simply tearing him down. That's not who Job was, and he's looking back at those days. He's going, man, I'm longing for that time when I was able to help people. But now here I am. I'm the one who's in need, and it's not being given to me. He knows what it feels like to be on the receiving end of rejection and despair and hopelessness that many people feel at the hands of others who have plenty. We should take that as a warning for ourselves. If we have plenty, why wouldn't we offer it? If we have plenty, why wouldn't we try to help someone else? If I have time, why wouldn't I seek out a way to use it to be an aid to someone else? If I had talent, why wouldn't I use that to serve in some capacity? If I have the money, why wouldn't I use it as a resource to lift someone else up? God has given us everything that we have. There's not a single thing that I have ever earned or achieved without God's help. God is at the heart of every single bit of it, whether I wanted to recognize it or acknowledge it. It's because of God. Everything that I have, my house, my home, my barn, everything that I've got, I wouldn't have any of it. I wouldn't have my cars. You know, I wouldn't have my marriage. I wouldn't have my child. I wouldn't have anything without God saying yes. It's because of him. Why would I not want to take that blessing? Why would I not want to take that blessing and then extend that blessing forward and help other people? Why would I just simply want to sit on it and just hold it for myself, just raking it all in? This is mine, don't touch it. That's not who we're called to be. It's not what we're called to do. And Job's looking at these three friends and he's like, man, you all so have missed the mark. It's not even funny. Then we get into chapter 30. Chapter 30 is the present tense. This is where Job stands in this moment of the story. He's recounting his current state. And so in verse 1, he says, but now they laugh at me, men who are younger than I. In other words, there's no respect. You see, especially back in that time, if you were younger than someone, you respected your elder. And he's looking and saying, but now they laugh at me, those who are younger than I am. are laughing at me. Verses 1 through 8, Job is considering that even though that there's these people who are now mocking him, that they are, by their actions, still more needy than he is in his current condition. Stop and think about that for a second. Stop and think about that for a second. That Job is saying, the way that these people are treating me, especially these three friends, and others maybe that are around, he's going, those people who are younger than me, those people that are claiming to be wiser than me, those people that are supposed to be helping me in my time of need, these people are actually more in need than I am in my current state, in my current despair, in my current suffering and grief with everything that I have lost. These people who are treating me this way, they are actually more in need than I am. That's a pretty heavy revelation. And I got news for you, people. You look around you, and there are plenty of people in this world that have stuff. They do. They have stuff. Some of them even have tons and tons of people around them who are just busy all the time trying to do things for them. Let me do. But the second whatever the attraction to them goes away is, those people go away too. So if your money is what's attracting the people around you so that they want to be near you, so that they want to do things for you, if your money went away, would those people still be around you? Is it what you're doing to attract people? Maybe it's something you're doing. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's just your lifestyle. Maybe you're crazy and you're insane, but what if you decided to stay home all of a sudden and said, you know what, no, I'm going to give up my wild and crazy life. Would the people around you stick around? Don't put value in anything more than you put value into God and the things that he has called for you to do. Because if your money goes away and all of your people that were only around you because of your money go away, then what? What do you got left? See, I think this is a lot of times what happens with celebrities. See, they have all these people that are around them. They have all this money, and people want to be a part of that. Why? Because they want to try to get some of that money. And we love you. We want to be around you for the things you can do for me and the things that you can give me. But the minute those things begin to slow down, or the minute those things begin to stop, all of that goes away. All of it. And you're left alone. And for many people, and especially celebrities, oftentimes they feel alone even in the midst of a crowd. You know why? Because they know that that's not true love. They know that those people aren't really there for them. Those people are there for what they can gain from them. If that's how you're living your life, I encourage you to stop. Stop seeking after what they can do for you, and instead seek after what God can do for you. Because what they're going to do, who they are, whoever these people are that are around you, they are going to be temporary. They might be your best friend today, but they can absolutely be gone tomorrow. You know who can't be gone tomorrow? God. When we stop putting satisfaction, when we stop rating satisfaction on the things that we have and the people around us, and instead we find satisfaction in God, it's the only satisfaction that we'll ever need. It's the only satisfaction that we'll ever desire. Listen, it's insane to think that way if you don't know who God is. But I'm telling you, I promise you, if you seek after God, he'll be the last that you ever seek. You won't need anything else or anyone else. Don't get me wrong, you're still going to want to buy whatever, let's not get crazy. What I'm talking about, though, is true love, true worth, true satisfaction. And you're going to find that in the Lord, through Jesus Christ, and in nothing else. So, in 9 through 15, chapter 30, verses 9 through 15, Job describes those that are against him, his friends included, because like verse 11 says, because God has loosed my cord and humbled me. They have cast off restraint in my presence. In other words, he's like, they're not holding anything back. They are revealing their true nature against me. I thought they were friends. Now they're revealing their true selves to me. In verses 16 to 23, Job is now a vision of grief and despair. He's just explaining this grief and this despair. And in verse 16 specifically, he says, "And now my soul is poured out within me." In 19 and 20, this despair is shown. He says, "God has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. And I cry for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me." He's feeling such despair, such loss, such grief in these verses. In 24 to 31, Job now sees himself as one of the people that he used to help in times of need. He recognizes now himself in those other shoes. He's like, I am exactly who I would have helped. I am exactly who I would have reached out to. I am exactly who I would have loved on. I'm exactly who I would have given money to, who I would have fed, who I would have given shelter to, who I would have clothed. I am that person now. He's looking around. He's like, where's the help for me? Where's my help? Who is going to arise to the occasion? Verse 26 specifically, he says, "But when I hoped for good, evil came. And when I waited for light, darkness came." And in verse 31, he says, "My lyre is turned to mourning, and my pipe to the voice of those who weep." This is specifically at his friends when he says that I hoped for good and evil came. That's a direct dig at them. When they had every opportunity to come and to be a help to him, instead they just tore him apart and they ripped him to pieces. They tore him down and they stomped on him while he was on the ground. When he thought he couldn't get any lower, they kicked him. He's thinking, this is horrible. He's like, I waited for some sort of light and I thought you guys were it. Instead, only darkness came. But then Job switches gears. And this is where we'll land for today in chapter 31. Chapter 31, this is Job's final appeal. And this is where he makes his defense before the Lord. This is where he starts to lay everything out. This is almost like the trial has been happening, and now he's standing up to give his last statement. This is the part where that attorney stands up at the end and he's addressing the jury, and they're just making this proclamation that is either going to cast guilt or innocence. It's the culmination of the trial. This is where Job is. He's now making this final appeal, his defense. Chapter 31, verses 1 through 4 says that Job expresses his belief that he lives according to the Lord's ways. So in verse 1, he says, "I have made a covenant with my eyes." I have made a covenant with my eyes. What he's saying is I have been pure, not full of lust. So he's kind of looking. It almost seems here in this section that he's kind of looking at maybe like the commandments, and he's saying, look, I'm telling you, I am following these things. So he says, I've made a covenant with my eyes in verse 1. Verse 4, he says, does not he see my ways and number all my steps? So in other words, God, you see me. You're a witness for me. You know who I am. You know what I've done. You're the one who numbers all of my steps. He's saying, I've lived this life before you, God, and nothing has been hidden from you. You know me. You know who I am. Nothing has been hidden. Verses 5 through 8, Job believes in a righteous judgment, and he trusts the Lord to judge him justly. Verses 5 and 6 specifically, he says, I have walked with falsehood, and my foot has hastened to deceit. Let me be weighed in a just balance, and let God know my integrity. He's like, look, I've walked with this falsehood where these people are making these accusations against me. He's like, but instead of what they say, let you be the judge of me, God. Let you, the Lord, be the judge of me. He's going to trust that. He says, you know of my integrity. And then it says, Job is ready to accept punishment if found guilty by the Lord. So in verse 7, he says, if my step has turned aside from the way, and my heart has gone after my eyes. If my step has turned aside from the way, and my heart has gone after my eyes. Now I just want to point this out to you, that when you read this and you hear where he says, if my step has turned aside from the way, he's talking about the way of the Lord. There's another instance in the Bible where we get this idea of the way. And I want to point you to that. It's in John 14:6, where Jesus replies to him and he says, I am the way and the truth and the life. And no one comes to the Father except through me. And Job is saying, if my step has turned aside from the way, he says, I'm willing to accept the judgment, the punishment that comes from that. But he says, God, again, you are my witness. You are my testimony. You know me. Nothing's been hidden from you. And I'm here to tell you that because Jesus Christ is the way, and he is the truth, and he is the life, that you will never get to heaven. You will never get to heaven. You will never get to the Father except through Jesus, because Jesus is the way. Job didn't necessarily know Jesus back then, because remember, this is all pre-Jesus. This is Old Testament. Jesus is New Testament. But still there was this pointing to the way of God. It's all relevant. In verses 9 through 12, Job is presenting his defense now on adultery. And so he says in verse 9, he says, if my heart has been enticed toward a woman, he's like, if my heart has been enticed towards a woman. Job is expressing how he's been faithful to his wife, expressing that adultery would then be considered a heinous crime. And in verse 11, it's one that he says would be deserving of punishment by the judges. And back in this time, if you were convicted of adultery, you were stoned to death. That sentence for adultery, the weight of its guilt was a death sentence. It was serious, and it was that for both parties. I know oftentimes we think, oh yeah, they would drag the woman out. No, they would. If you were caught in an adulterous relationship, both of you were killed, the man and the woman. In verses 13 to 15, Job speaks of his servants and how he treated them. And so it says, if in verses 13 and 14, it says, if I have rejected the cause of my manservant or maidservant, when they brought a complaint against me, what shall I do when God rises up? When he makes inquiry, what shall I answer him? Job believes that he's cared for his servants. He believes that he's listened to them. If he's ever done anything that was against him, he believes that they brought that to him, that he would then rectified it and made it right. He says, I'm sure that if I were to stand before you today, God, and my manservant and my maidservants came before you, that you wouldn't find any wrongdoings. Instead, I have treated them correctly, and they would have no complaints against me. He valued every servant that he had, he valued them as God's people. He looked at them as God's people. It says in verse 15, and this is sort of proof of that, he says, did not he who made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us in the womb? See, Job was their boss. That's true. Job was absolutely their boss, but he believed that all people, servants, were just as worthy of respect and treatment. He believed, again, that they were God's people. He didn't believe that he was simply better than them just because he was their boss and they were a servant. He believed that they were still God's people and that they should be treated respectfully and rightly and justly. So he believes that if he stood before the Lord, that they would not be able to bring any complaints at all. It's sort of like him saying, I understand that I'm the boss and you're the servant. We still put our pants on the same way. He's like, I'm not any better than you. I just happen to be the person who's in charge. It's a good way of approaching life, of looking at the people who are around us and saying, you know what, I get it. I get it. I hold this particular position, and yes, I might be able to tell you what to do or tell you how you need to do it or whatever, but it doesn't mean that I'm better than you. It doesn't mean that I have all the answers either. Sometimes I might need to listen to you. Sometimes I may need to correct something that I've done against you. Even though I'm over you, sometimes I need to humble myself beneath you. It's a good lesson for each of us. We're not always right. And if we live our life in a manner where I feel like I am lifted high, it just gives you that much further of a way to fall. Don't put yourself on a pedestal to be knocked down from. And verses 16 to 23, Job is expressing that he's lived according to the Lord's command to care over all of God's creation, and that included providing for other people and that couldn't necessarily provide for themselves. So again, remember earlier I was telling you that, Job provided for people. He brought them in, he gave them what they needed, he fed them, he clothed them, he gave them shelter, those sorts of things. He says here in verses 16 to 23, he says, if I have withheld anything that the poor desired, or have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel alone, and the fatherless has not eaten of it. For from my mouth the fatherless grew up with me, as with a father. In other words, he acted as a father figure to them. And from my mother's womb I guided the widow. He cared for them. If I have seen anyone perish for lack of clothing, or the needy without covering, it says, if his body has not blessed me, and if he was not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless, because I saw my help in the gate, then let my shoulder blade fall from my shoulder. Let my arm be broken from its socket, for I was in terror of calamity from God, and I could not have faced his majesty. He's like, if I saw these things, I tried my best to fix it and correct it and be a help. He's like, and if I'm lying to you, he's like, and God, again, I can't hide these things from you. He's like, if I'm lying to you, then just cut my arm off. Let it fall from its socket. Break it. Break me. Pay close attention to verse 23. He says this, he says, for I was in terror of calamity from God. I could not have faced his majesty. He's like, you know what? I fear the consequence that could come from as a result of me not doing what God has called for me to do. I fear the Lord that way, he says. As any good father wants to be, I wanted to make a good impression on my dad. I wanted my dad to know that I was doing my best, at trying my best. I wanted my dad to know that, to feel it. Job wants his father, the Lord, he wants his father to know and to feel the same thing, that I did the best that I could. You've asked me to do these things. I'm trying to do them. I'm trying to honor them. I'm trying to do them to the best of my ability. He has a righteous fear of the Lord. He has a righteous fear of being found guilty. The punishment that could ensue from living a life that is like the wicked. He desired so much to please God. He desired it so much, just like anybody would desire to please their own Father here on earth. In verses 24 to 28, Job talks about how he's avoided idols in his life. So he says in verse 24, he says, if I have made gold my trust, or called fine gold my confidence, if I have rejoiced because my wealth was abundant, or because my hand had found much. Job kept all of his worldly possessions in a right attitude. He kept them in this right perspective, knowing that it was all provided by God. He's like, everything that I had, everything that I was able to obtain, it was all simply because God gave it to me. Remember all the way back in chapter 1. All the way back in chapter 1, what was it that Job said when all of the calamity began to happen? Remember, the servant after servant after servant kept coming up and saying, hey, your camels were taken. Hey, your sheep were taken. Hey, this was taken. Hey, all of your children just died. All your wealth is gone. Everything's been ramshackled. It's just, everything's gone. And what was it that Job said? He said, the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. He believes strongly that God has blessed him immensely, and then God went, nope, I'm taking it all away now, because it was God's to do with, not Job's. He was able to use it for a time, and that's the way he views it. Everything was temporary. It's not really his. Everything on this earth is temporary. It's not ours. So whatever I have right now, it could absolutely be taken away tomorrow, and guess what? I would have to say the same thing. That the Lord has given me what I've got right now, but if God chooses to take it away, then the Lord has taken. It's his to do rightly. He created it, and he gave it. Job also knew that in verse 28, he knew that idol worship was prohibited. So he knew not to hold on to the things that he possessed. He knew not to hold those things in a higher regard than the Lord himself, because that would be considered an idol, something that he worshiped more than God, that is breaking a commandment. There should be no other gods before me. You see, he looks at that and he says, oh man, to hold something in higher regard than God, that's cause for righteous judgment. He knows that it's bad. Verses 29 to 30, Job, he says, I have loved enemies. And so he says, if I have rejoiced at the ruin of him who hated me, or exulted when evil overtook him, I have not let my mouth sin by asking for his life with a curse. He's like, people have done me wrong. People have absolutely done me wrong. And I haven't cursed them because of it. I haven't spoken a word against an adversary or an enemy. In 31 to 32, Job has cared for strangers who had no place to stay, and he cared for the needs of everybody around him. It says, he says, if the men of my tent have not said, who is there who has not been filled with his meat? The sojourner has not lodged in the street. I have opened my doors to the traveler. He's invited in complete strangers, people that weren't of his own camp, of his own people. He's invited them in. He cared for everybody. In verses 35 to 37, he says, oh, that I had one to hear me. So he's wrapping this thing up. He says, oh, that I had one to hear me. He says, here's my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. Oh, that I had indictment written by my adversary. Job is looking forward to his day in court. He is so looking forward to his day in court, so to speak. He longs for God to be able to hear his case. He wants God to hear this defense that he has prepared. And he wants God to cast a righteous judgment, because again, he knows that nothing's been hidden from God. That God knows the absolute truth. He says in verses 36 to 37, and this is where Job has to be careful of pride. He says, surely I would carry it on my shoulder, and I would bind it on me as a crown. I would give him an account of all my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. Job is so sure that he'll be considered blameless here that he's like, I am willing to wear everything that I am saying to you as a crown. I will approach God as if I am a prince before the throne. There's a danger here. There's a danger of becoming too prideful, and instead of humbling yourself before God and saying, look, you know what's right. You know if I've done wrong. Job is so sure that he's willing to look behind him and say, I haven't done anything. I'm willing to stand here before you and tell you that I am blameless, and that is wrong. Because I'm not blameless. Job is not blameless in regard to all sin. It's bordering on boasting of yourself, of lifting yourself up. Job is so confident of his lack of sin that he's willing to wear it as a crown. It's just crazy. It's crazy talk. Crazy talk. And his statement is dangerous because oftentimes we do sinful things without sometimes even realizing that we've done it. In verses 38 to 40, Job is ready for judgment, and he's willing to accept the righteous punishment deemed appropriate by the Lord. So he says in verse 40, he says, let thorns grow instead of wheat, and foul weeds instead of barley. So crops were an essential way back in Job's day. If you had crops, you were able to eat. If you didn't have crops, you didn't have food. So it's pretty easy and simple to see sort of what he's saying here. He says, let thorns grow instead of wheat. He's like, so instead of me getting a harvest, just let it be weeds, let it be crap. Let it be the stuff that doesn't do me any good, stuff that I can't eat, stuff that I can't survive on. If what I'm saying is wrong, then take it all away. I'm willing to accept the punishment. This was Job's way of saying, I'm ready for either condemnation or restoration. I'm ready for you to either find me guilty or find me innocent. Job is ready. And then it says that the words of Job are now ended. So Job is done. Job has finished speaking his piece. He has made his case before the Lord. He has shut up his friends. He has made his case before God, and he is ready for judgment. And what we're going to see as we come into next week is there's going to be this new character introduced into the story. Someone we haven't heard from, someone we haven't met yet. His name is Elihu. And he's got a few things he needs to get off his chest to Job. Definitely has a few things he wants to say to Job's friends. Not everything he's going to say is going to be right. Not everything, and there's some disconnect on some people believe that Elihu comes in and just really lays down what God believes. But then there's this other side that says, oh no, it's not all exactly right, so it can't be what God believes. And here's the thing, so next week we're going to be hearing from Elihu. We're going to be hearing what his thoughts are. We're going to get to see the picture that he paints. And then the week after that, then we'll get to hear from God and his perspective. And so I encourage you to join us next week. And as we dive into this next section, this next set of chapters, to hear what Elihu has to say. We're on the down swing here in the book of Job, and I'm excited for us to continue pushing forward and learning more about what God wants us to know. But more than anything, we can't be prideful. More than anything, we can't rely on our own righteousness. Instead, we got to be faithful to God, and we got to trust in Him for everything.